Hello. If you haven't already, I strongly recommend you watch part 1 first before continuing here. For those who already have, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to examine two of the GOP's prominent abortion bills. The first one is the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. Besides being a redundant law, in that it's already a prosecutable crime to murder or let a baby die, for all intents and purposes, this act states that it's all right to kill a living fetus while still in the womb. But if the baby somehow escapes his executioner's attempt and is still alive after being forcibly removed from the womb, it is then and only then afforded legal protection. Let's not play coy here. A baby doesn't magically become alive upon exiting the womb. But let's pretend anyway for a moment that this bill isn't redundant and is needed. It only has the potential of protecting an extremely small percentage of late-term abortions. To be perfectly upfront, there are many variables to take into account that I unfortunately can't do because of not being able to obtain all the data. But I don't think it's necessary to make my point, as you'll all soon see. With that said, Guttmacher Institute's data for 2017 reports there were 862,300 abortions in the United States that year. Though the trend has been and continues to steadily decline by all accounts, let's round that number up to 1 million per year for the sake of argument and to offset any discrepancies on my part. Now, according to the information I have, only 1.3% of all abortions in the U.S., that's 13,000, take place after 21 weeks, which just so happens to be the youngest premature baby on record to survive. While abortions at this stage should not be happening at all, except in the rare case to save the mother's life, botched abortions don't happen all that frequently. Since the actual numbers are unknown, let me err once again in favor of this bill, and let's say there are 6,000 failed late-term abortions each year. Now we must factor in that only 5.1% of premature babies at 22 weeks are expected to survive. So out of 6,000 botched late-term abortions, 306 are expected to survive. 306 out of 13,000. It should be noted that 3.4% of those 6,000 are expected to be born without any birth defects, which is 204, while 102 of those 306 will be. I know with each additional week, the survival rate begins increasing exponentially for the fetus, but abortions also begin declining rapidly. And when you take into account that those born alive before 22 weeks have a much lesser chance of survival, I think it balances itself out enough to not affect my conclusion. Even if we decide that saving 306 babies is better than nothing, as if that's really the best we can do, how would this law even be enforceable? If a doctor clinic has no problems terminating a living baby while in the womb, does anyone really think they'd have a problem finishing the job outside the womb? It's a trivial distinction at this point, which would most likely never be reported to the government, as is the case now. Because this bill does nothing to stop living babies from being forcibly removed from the womb prematurely, some may be born before 21 weeks with a zero chance of survivability. Under this law, they'll be made to suffer a slow death rather than allow for a merciful killing. It's a feel-good law that in reality stinks to high heaven. Morally, ideologically, and statistically, what a complete waste of resources to pursue. Now comes the GOP's Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, something they've been trying to get passed for roughly 8 years now. While being hailed by many religious leaders and politicians as a major blow against so-called abortion rights, I'm here to tell you, and to their chagrin, if they're even capable of that this, nay, these acts by the GOP may have well has been written by...
Let's see, I don't know. Let me think. Let me knock on Mr. Noggin. Who could trick us into doing that? Could have been... Satan!
As the title suggests from both, these bills do not protect all life. In this case, it's only life that is capable of feeling pain, to which the Republican politicians have decided to be 20 weeks. Yet, admit they're not even sure about that. This means the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act would sanctify the killing of a defenseless unborn at 19 weeks and 6 days old, or 1 week prior to the youngest premature to survive thus far. The GOP's would-be law even acknowledges a fetus begins responding to touch at 8 weeks, yet they still allow for it to be terminated for up to 12 weeks longer, all because this new human life has yet to develop pain receptors. Who would support such repugnant legislation which violates the natural law and right reason? The kind of politicians we send to represent us in the federal government. That's who. Unfortunately, the GOP's chicanery doesn't stop there. While both bills cite the 14th Amendment and the Commerce Clause as their authority, the GOP's pain-capable bill oddly contains slightly different language. Congress has authority to extend protection to pain-capable unborn children under the Supreme Court's Commerce Clause precedents and under the Constitution's grants of powers to Congress under the Equal Protection, Due Process, and Enforcement Clauses of the 14th Amendment. Let me read that part again in case you missed it. Under the Supreme Court's Commerce Clause precedents. That's a dubious way of citing Congress's constitutional authority. It's an admission they believe the Supreme Court is the final arbiter of all constitutional questions. This subversive doctrine is otherwise known as judicial supremacy, but that is another subject for another time. The Law and Order GOP are using an erroneous Supreme Court's opinion to justify their own usurpations. They know damn well that the original intent of the Commerce Clause gives them no such power to regulate medical procedures or require patients to first attend counseling as their bill would do. That's the business of the states. Do we really want the federal government to have that authority over everyone? And what kind of counseling do you think the left will start mandating now the Republicans have agreed it's constitutional? So despite their incessant braying, they are originalists, and like their Democrat opponents, the GOP also interprets the Constitution as a living, breathing document to get what they want. And for what? In this case, it's a convoluted bill filled with subversive legal concepts that does very little to protect the life of the unborn. Approximately only 1.5% of abortions take place after 20 weeks, and even then the GOP bill would still allow it in cases of rape and incest. In other words, sorry kid, even though you're innocent in all this and you'll undoubtedly feel pain, your mother still has every right to terminate you. What a bunch of contradictory rubbish. There's an old legal adage that both parties have conveniently forgotten to apply in their discussion on a woman's right to choose. The right to swing your arm ends at the beginning of another man's nose. So under the natural law from which this principle is derived, a woman's right to terminate her pregnancy ends at the time of the quickening because it then violates the unborn's right to life. It's not rocket science, folks. Why are we allowing our public servants to get away with this level of idiocy? The corrupt GOP has accepted the false premises and erroneous precedents put forth by the progressive Democrats, and then like fools try to make them work.
Looks as though we're in for a splendid afternoon sport on this, the 127th Upper Class Twit of the Year show. And there's a big crowd here today to see these prize idiots in action.
Other than in some policies and in lip service, the GOP has long abandoned conservatism. This is why they have been so ineffectual or unwilling to reverse the usurpations made by the Democrats.
But wait! There's more! Hang on to your seat, baby! Cause this one's a screamer!
As previously noted, the Republicans cite the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection, Due Process, and Enforcement Clauses for authority. This is the federal government guaranteeing every state will conduct a fair trial in a court of law before depriving someone of their life, liberty, or property. So where is this due process for the living unborn? It doesn't exist now or in their legislation, nor are they applying it equally, only to those who feel pain who are not conceived through incest or rape, and those that are born alive. And by citing the Enforcement Clause, they're actually admitting they don't need any new legislation to stop all this. One gets a strong impression the GOP really doesn't want to do anything substantive about abortion, among other things, and instead are hiding behind failed legislation acts to appease their voting base. Then there's the so-called conservative media who has remained silent on this facade. And now you know the rest of the story. Thank you all for watching. Please like and subscribe to support this channel, as well as share your thoughts in the comments. It's much appreciated.